Who should be the number one pick in 2023 fantasy football? Let's talk about it. Welcome back, Fantasy Endgame community. I'm Pierre. He's Chris. We're ready to talk 2023. Who should be the number one pick? Let's look at the top candidates, and let's start with the guy who, despite being a tight end, you have to make a strong case for Travis Kelce. He was not only the tight end one in fantasy scoring, the next guy wasn't even close. The number 2 tight end was almost 100 PPR points away from him. Having that dominant advantage as a position, Chris, does that tempt you to take Kelce with the first pick?
Yeah, the interesting thing is right now on Underdog Draft, he is going as the number 1 pick. I get it, the positional advantage, but think about most leagues. Most leagues, you start 1 tight end, you start at least 2 running backs, probably 2 or 3 wide receivers, probably a flex or 2. Yes, he's a positional advantage at tight end, but he's a positional advantage at a position that isn't really that important in fantasy. So I certainly think Kelce's worth a first round pick, but number 1 just seems way too high to me.
Here's my thing. Obviously, if you're picking number 1, you're going to have to choose because he's not coming back to you in round 2. Yeah, he's definitely the number 1 guy there, and I think he still will be next year. I don't see any reason he wouldn't be, but I think I'd rather have a guy who's just going to score more points overall, and I feel like that'll give me more of an advantage. Agree with you. Kelce definitely should be a first-round pick, but I can't pull the trigger at the 1-1. If you're going receiver, let's talk about Stefon Diggs. A guy who upped his touchdown total, 10 touchdowns, 3rd among all wide receivers. He is one of the leading target getters, and he's tied to Josh Allen. So maybe making him one of the safest picks there. Does that tempt you?
Definitely think he's one of the safest picks, but there's some slight reasons to be worried. He's going to be, into his 30s here. Got to think the Bills are going to add another wide receiver. With all due respect to Gabe Davis and Isaiah McKenzie, they just aren't it, and they don't take enough pressure off of Stefon Diggs. I think Diggs is certainly a first-round pick, maybe even a top 5 pick, but again, I think the number 1 pick is just a little too much for Stefon Diggs.
I'll say out of this group we'll talk about, he's probably the guy I'm least interested in terms of looking at him at the top of the board, just because even though he will have some huge games, I think we've kind of seen the best that he has to offer so far, and it's really good. Don't get me wrong, he's an elite wideout, but I think there's some other guys we're going to talk about that are just a little bit better. One of those guys might be Tyreek Hill. So interesting season for Tyreek we've seen. Doesn't really matter what team he's on. To some extent, maybe who his quarterback is, but do you feel like he's got the upside? There are some question marks in Miami heading into next season.
I definitely think he has the upside. We've seen it, right? He has week-breaking, week-winning upside. I think the risk here, the only reason I probably wouldn't want to take him with my number 1 overall pick is just, what is Tua's future going to be? 3 concussions this season, missed the end of the season, of course, with another concussion. Is he 1 hit away from missing multiple weeks again, from maybe missing the rest of the season? We've seen it. That Teddy Bridgewater, Skylar Thompson, for as good as Tyreek Hill is, he can't overcome that kind of QB play. No wide receiver can. So probably a top 4, top 3 pick, but I just think at the 101, just because of the uncertainty with Tua, I think it's just a little too risky for me.
If you look statistically, he was number 2 in the league in receiving yards per game. He was a top 3 fantasy player overall. He did miss Tua for a few of those weeks and still put up those kind of numbers. But like you said, still so many question marks. It's hard to put him too high. So it's like you can't put him too low, right? He's definitely top 10, but number 1 might be a little too much. All right, now a guy who actually went number 1 in a lot of drafts this year, but we haven't talked about in a while, and that's Cooper Kupp. We know what happened, missed the whole last half of the season. Rams, just a season to forget after their most memorable season ever. So what do we expect from Cooper Kupp? Can he bounce back?
A lot of uncertainty here. Are we going to get a healthy Matthew Stafford? Will Sean McVay be back? Cooper Kupp also entering his 30s. I think Cooper Kupp probably has to be a top 5 pick next year, assuming Stafford is back and healthy and assuming it's McVay or another, good head coach. Hopefully they don't go out and hire like a Matt Patricia type coach or something like that to derail this offense. But assuming all that is in place, I think he still has to be top 5. Again, can you really take Cooper Kupp, kind of the unknown of Stafford, at the 1.01? I don't think I can. A top 5 pick, but not the number 1 pick.
Probably more question marks I have about Kupp in that situation than with the Miami situation, because like you said, we don't even know if the coach will be back. Stafford says he's coming back. That offensive line was so bad. It's almost amazing Kupp did anything with as bad as that offense was. To me, it's a little too much risk. I think I might have a hard time even pulling the trigger in the top 5 with Kupp. So I can't consider him a number 1. I know what he did in that historic season, but this whole offense in general has me a little worried, and he's not one of the youngest receivers. I mean, Kupp is still solid at that, maybe 7 to 8 range, but I can't go number 1. Now here's another interesting one. Jamar Chase was in play for the 1-1 for a lot of leagues this year. Didn't come through, but really because of injury. I mean, he missed 6 games. His yards per game were actually up from his rookie season. So where do you put Chase?
I mean, Chase is definitely a guy who has an argument to be the number 1 pick, because we saw he did go through that little stretch early in the season where he was, good but not great. But we've seen what his upside is. He's right there with Tyreek, as one of these guys that has massive, just week-breaking upside. He's tied to Joe Burrow. There's no uncertainty with his situation, right? He's going to be the number 1 wide receiver for Joe Burrow. Zach Taylor will be back. Like, everything is going to be the same next year, pretty much, for the Bengals. This is an offense, a team that's on the rise. For me, he might be my number 2 pick next year. I mean, obviously it's early, but right now I think he's probably my number 2 pick. Just not quite my number 1 pick yet.
For me, I don't think I let him fall past pick number 3, because again, people will say, well, he didn't quite live up to expectations. He probably would have surpassed last season's total. We don't know, but he missed, again, so many games. And what makes me feel really good is no lingering effects whatsoever. He came back. Some people were worried. Would it bother him with the hip? Not at all. So Chase, strong case to be number 1. So then there's the guy who was the number 1 player among all flex players in fantasy up until week 17, and that is Austin Ekeler. Regression, not so much. Lower touchdown percentage, definitely not. It's almost hard to say that he shouldn't be the number 1 pick. So can you even make a case against him?
Austin Ekeler is going to be a tough one. Over 100 catches, almost 20 touchdowns. Can he do this again? I don't know. I mean, we've seen this with guys like Christian McCaffrey. It's hard to sustain this level of play for 2 straight years, and he did it. 3 straight years? I mean, that's really asking a lot, especially at the running back position, because that's the thing. He's been so healthy the last 2 years. He's only missed 1 game, and that was because of COVID, because he got COVID. It wasn't even an injury. He's been incredibly healthy the last 2 years. Can he sustain this for another year? I get it if you want to do it. I'm not going to I don't think it's a bad pick, but me personally, my risk tolerance, I don't think I can.
I mean, really, the only argument I could put up and the only knock against him is that he's a running back. That's it. Running backs just don't last forever. He's got so many touches under his belt. You got to feel like if Lombardi's still the coordinator there, he's almost in the bag to get 100 catches again, because they'll just keep dumping it off to him. He's got Herbert at quarterback behind him. That helps. If you really want a running back, I think Eckler's probably your guy. But for me, I just don't think I'm going running back at the 1-1. Now, if you do want a running back with the number 1 pick, maybe you should say it's Christian McCaffrey, who, despite having to be on the Carolina Panthers with Matt Rule for the first half of the season, still finished as the number 4 flex scorer in all of fantasy. And we saw what he did down the stretch through the fantasy playoffs. He helped carry some teams to championship. What about CMC?
Yeah, I'm just going to make all the same arguments I basically made for Ekeler. We saw a nice bounce back year from McCaffrey this year. He stayed healthy after 2 years of dealing with injury, but now he's going to be coming off a season where they're probably going to make a deep playoff run, and he's going to get a ton of touches again. You do have to factor in this guy has a ton of wear and tear on him. Will San Francisco lean on him as much? Because remember, early when he was with the 49ers, they weren't. It wasn't until Elijah Mitchell got hurt that they really started just fully leaning on him. I mean, will they want to do that for a full season again next year? No argument for me. If you want to take him at the 101, if you want to go running back first and you want to go with McCaffrey, he's in a great offense. He's in a great system for running backs. He's going to catch a ton of passes. But again, like you said, my risk tolerance, kind of like what you said about running back, I'd rather not.
There actually are a few uncertainties here. San Francisco, you think it's the perfect system for any running back. Now, some of the games he's played, multiple games here with San Francisco, Deebo Samuel wasn't healthy. What if that affects him throughout next season? Is Trey Lance going to be the quarterback next year? Is it going to be Brock Purdy? If Lance is a starter, does that affect the running game in any way? It's not set in stone that he's going to be the top guy, and we're now all of a sudden just forgetting how often he's been injured the last couple of years. I think there's too many red flags here for the number 1 pick. Don't get me wrong, he's still a top 5 pick at the very least, but for me, I don't think he's my number 1. And then last but not least, Justin Jefferson. I know week 17 wasn't really a bright spot on his resume, but other than that, you've got to say that he was, of course, the wide receiver 1 in PPR leagues, but also maybe the most solid pick out of all of these.
I just can't find an argument against Justin Jefferson. He's gone over 1,400 yards each of the first 3 years of his career, over 1,600 yards each of the last 2 years. Just him and Tyreek are the only guys over 1,600 yards this year, and he's done that in 2 straight years. I mean, how many guys even go over 1,400 yards on a season? He's done it every single year. He's in a great system. He's still got Kirk Cousins. They still have a terrible defense. They're going to have to throw it a ton. He's young. Can't find a reason not to take him with the first pick. For me, Justin Jefferson, I don't care. I know he bombed in week 17. I don't care. He's my number 1 pick.
Only knock, maybe you could say, well, he only scored 8 touchdowns. Although technically he had 9 because he scored 1 on the ground too. It doesn't matter. This is a guy that carrying you week in, week out. The upside here is that he wins you your week single-handedly. We saw him do it several times. Maybe I would be worried that the Vikings somehow go out and upgrade their defense so much that they just don't need to pass the ball that much. You know what? I don't care. I'm still taking Justin Jefferson number 1 also. He's that good. I think that I would definitely rather have the guy who I know is going to be in play to possibly lead the league in receptions and yards. Yeah, to me, Jefferson is not just the safest pick, but the one with the most upside. Now you know who you should take at number 1, but what shouldn't you do in your draft? Click here, check out some of those mistakes that you want to avoid in your fantasy draft.